today's class, how do organisms reproduce, we have seen the introduction of this chapter, that how the reproduction is essential for the survival of an organism. It's not a life process that without which an organism would not be able to survive, but for the continuity of the species on this earth, reproduction is an essential process. And for this, of course, we have learned about the DNA copying and all, and then we have come to know the types of reproduction, in which I just gave you a preliminary idea about asexual reproduction and that of the sexual reproduction. Now, asexual reproduction is the one in which only a single parent is involved, and the sexual reproduction is the one in which two parents are involved. And also in case of asexual reproduction, no gametes are involved, whereas in case of sexual reproduction, gametes are involved. Okay, so this was the basic difference which we discussed in our last class. Today we are going to read about the mode of reproduction both in unicellular as well as in multicellular organisms. Now, asexual reproduction first we are going to discuss. Now, asexual reproduction, as a single parent is involved. If we talk about the simple unicellular organisms like that of your bacteria or like that of your amoeba, in them the entire organism is made up of a single cell. Like this is an amoeba cell or parent cell, which is a single cell. Now, when this single cell is to multiply or is to reproduce, how will it do so? It will simply divide itself. At first, the division of the nucleus will take place. That is called as your karyokinesis, and that it is followed by that of the division of the cytoplasm. So first the nucleus divides, then the furrowing of the cell membrane takes place it towards inward, and that is how the parental cell divides into two daughter amoebae. Now, this process in which a single parent cell divides into two daughter cells, this type of process of asexual reproduction is known as your binary fission. Bi means two. Now, if we talk about the bacteria, or even if you talk about the plasmodium, which causes malaria in case of human beings, they also undergo the process of fission, which is slightly different from this. What do they do so is that in them the nucleus divides a number of times, and after the division of the nucleus, each of the nucleus is rounded off by the cytoplasm to form a number of spore-like structure inside it. Now, this type of process is known as your multiple fission. So, multiple fission and binary fission is the first kind of asexual reproduction which we have discussed today. Okay, next is our fragmentation. Now, fragmentation is also a type of asexual reproduction which is seen in case of simple organisms like that of your algae, especially the green algae, which is called as your Spirogyra. Now, Spirogyra is also known as pond silk. If you go to some damp places or some place where the water always regularly falls, you will find that the place has become slippery, and it is some green color structures are growing over there. On the ponds also, sometimes you will see the water turns green color things are floating, silky substances. So those are the filaments of the Spirogyra. Now, the Spirogyra, what happens is that when it becomes mature, it's the growth phase is completed, then since it is made up of compartment type of cells, now these just breaks naturally by its own, and each of this will be now treated as a fragment which is capable of now growing the entire filament by itself. So this is a natural process of splitting up of the filament, resulting into the formation of the fragments, which will later on grow into a mature filament of the Spirogyra. So this is also a kind of asexual reproduction. So see here, the parental characteristics are restored in the offsprings. The reason is because the genetic material is same, only a single parent is involved. We have seen in case of binary fission, in case of fragmentation. So the genetic alterations chances are very less as compared to that of the sexual reproduction, which we will be reading further. Next type of asexual reproduction is called as your regeneration. Now, regeneration and fragmentation, students makes confusion while writing during the time of examination. In case of fragmentation, the filament fragments naturally after becoming mature, whereas in case of regeneration, what happens is that due to some accident, when the organism cuts into pieces, and each of these pieces now is capable of developing into a full grown organism. Like this is a planaria, And when this planaria accidentally gets cut into, say, 3 pieces, the head, the middle piece, and the tail piece, so each one of them is capable of producing a new planaria. This is seen in case of Hydra also. So regeneration is a type of asexual reproduction in which the organism, due to some accidental things in the water currents, it gets cut off, and each of the portions are capable of growing into a new organism. But this cannot be considered to be a type of asexual reproduction, because the organism cannot wait to get cut, isn't it? So it's an accidental thing, but yes, if it happens, then it will result into formation of a new organism. So since new organism is formed from a single parent, so we can call it to be a kind of asexual reproduction. Next is budding. In case of budding is a common phenomenon seen in case of a unicellular organism also. Here I have not drawn that is yeast. In case of yeast is a fungus. The single yeast cell is capable of producing an outgrowth, and in that outgrowth the nucleus at first of the parent cell will divide, and a portion of segment of nucleus will go over there. A wall will form at the point of the attachment with that of the parent cell with the help of a partition wall, and now this yeast cell, which is the newly formed yeast cell, will get detached from the body of the parent yeast cell, and it can now grow if it finds a favorable places for its germination. Sometimes it is also seen that the buds which are grown on the body of the yeast cell, it fails to get detached. So they form a kind of pseudo filament like structure. So that also can be observed in case of yeast cell. So yeast cell also undergoes budding. So yeast is a unicellular organism showing budding. So sometimes in exam this can come as your question, that name one unicellular organism which shows budding. So answer is yeast. Okay, and Hydra is a multicellular organism with a simplified body structure with tissue level organization. So there are certain specialized tissues in which they have the power of regeneration, and they produce a kind of outgrowth like this, and this outgrowth further develops with the tentacles, and then it becomes mature, and finally it gets detached. So this portion which outgrowth which develops attached with that of the parental cell, this is called as your bud. And now when this portion of the Hydra gets detached, it falls onto the suitable substratum, it also grows into a mature Hydra. So this process of asexual reproduction is known as budding. So budding in multicellular organism, example is your Hydra. Budding in case of unicellular organism, example is yeast. Next is spore formation. Now spore formation is a characteristic features of the simplified organisms like that of your fungus. Fungus is a multicellular organism, but yeast again is a fungus, but it is unicellular. So these are the exceptions. We are not going for the exceptions, we are going for the common or the general criteria. So fungus body is very simplified filamentous. So the filamentous, the vegetative growth takes place horizontally on the surface of the substratum in which they are growing. Suppose you have a bread piece in your home, or if you have a cake piece in your home and you keep it in a damp place, after a few days you will see, 1 or 2 days only, you will see, and the temperature is also right nowadays for the formation of the fungus on the food items. So it will form a cottony substance on the surface of the bread, and if you just keep it for 1 or 2 days more, you will find that that white cottony substance turns out to be blackish or greenish in color, because then it starts sporulating. That means it starts formation of spores. So when the filament is completely grown, some of the filaments grow vertically, some of the filaments they grow vertically. Okay, so when they grow vertically, they form this structure which is called as your sporangiophore. That means sporangium bearing branch. Okay, now this sporangiophore, inside it undergoes division. Of course it will be mitotic division, and then cytoplasm and nucleus will round off to form very minute light weighted structures which are called the spores. Now when this sporangium is mature, it dehisces. Okay, that means it bursts open. So when it bursts open, it becomes dry, so that is why it dehisces. So the spores are liberated, and the spores are so light in weight that they can be easily carried by the wind or the water, and wherever they will fall, they will find a suitable substratum, they will grow. So this is an example of rhizopus, that is a bread mold which shows the asexual mode of reproduction by means of formation of spores. Okay, The next is your vegetative propagation. Now vegetative propagation is a characteristic of the higher plants. Now generally we have seen that the higher plants, they grow by means of seeds, isn't it? But there are some plants which can grow other than seeds also through their vegetative parts, like by the help of their stem, by the help of their roots, by the help of their leaves. So when such kind of growth takes place in plants, other than the seeds, the entire plant can be grown from other parts of the plant. We call that type of propagation or that type of reproduction to be your vegetative propagation. Vegetative word has come from the vegetative parts of the plants. Okay, so examples of these are your tuber, bulb, rhizome, etc. Now tuber is an example of potato. Potato, you have seen it, in that you might have seen that potato has some buds on it. So if you cut those places where the buds are producing small outgrowths, and if you sow them in the soil, then gradually that will develop into a new plant. Bulb is, onion is the example of bulb. Any kind of lily, that is a lilium family or liliaceae family rather, they develop a kind of bulb like things under the ground, although they are stem, but they are growing under the ground. So that is the organ of propagation in them. So if you can store them, the next season again if you sow them in the soil, it will develop into a new plant. So that is also a vegetative propagation. Rhizome are the one which is growing under the soil, like you might have seen in case of arum. Okay, in case of arum, colocasia, alocasia, these are the plants which have this rhizome. So rhizomes are the underground, you can say, structures which are also helpful for the formation of an entire plant from that. So this is not at all a seed from which the plant is growing. So that is an example of your asexual reproduction, and since vegetative part is utilized, so we call that to be the vegetative propagation. Now this vegetative propagation which we have just learnt about, these are naturally growing, you can say, the parts from which the plants can develop. Bryophyllum is the plant in which the leaves are the organ of propagation. From the notches of the leaves, like if it is a leaf, say suppose if it is a leaf like this, if it's a leaf, okay, so in that case these notches are the places from which the new plants will be developing, the rooting will take place. Okay, so here the organ of propagation is your leaf. So leaf is the organ of propagation in case of your bryophyllum. So here naturally the organs are helping to develop a plant. But sometimes human beings take a role in selecting the crops, especially it is in terms of fruits and in terms of flower, that whichever plants we like it actually in terms of ornamentals or in terms of fruits and all, and if we cut the stem and grow them into a new plant, then they give the fruits much more faster than those plants which are raised up by the seeds. Now since here the propagation is done by the selection of the plant material, that is the plant's vegetative part, by human beings, so this type of propagation is known as artificial propagation. Okay, vegetative propagation and artificial propagation. Artificial propagation, why? Because here human beings are involved, that is why it is called as your artificial vegetative propagation. So one example is your cutting, that is stem cutting. Mango tree is there, if you like the fruits of that mango tree, if you do a stem cutting, sow them into the soil, giving some hormones which will be helping in the formation of rooting of the plant, that will develop into a new plant, and now you can place it into a separate place and the plant will be giving you fruits within 2 to 3 years. It will not have to, you don't have to wait for 10 years or 7 years or like that before it starts giving you fruit. So that is an example of artificial vegetative propagation. Another example of artificial vegetative propagation is called as your grafting. Okay, it is called as your grafting. Now in this grafting, what is done is that two plants are selected. One with the roots, which is not the desirable plant which will give us a fruit or the flower, and the other one which will be actually grafted over this, that is the stalk of the plant, which will be giving us the desirable fruit or the flower. Now these two things are called as your stalk and scion. Okay, stalk and scion. Now what is the stalk and scion? The stalk is the one with the roots, okay, which will be at the base. It will be forming the base, and scion will be on the top of it. And when they are attached with each other, they are attached in a way is that, again I have to show you here or else you won't be understanding. Okay, like they should be obliquely cut. See, they should be obliquely cut, and the upper one also will be obliquely cut like this. And here you will be tying them with a piece of cloth and covering them with a plastic. Now this portion is having the cambium inside it, isn't it? It will be having a cambium inside it, and this is having the roots and all. So when you are regularly watering it, what will happen is that gradually a connection will be made between this stalk and that of the scion. Okay, and as a result the plant will now flourish and you will be getting your desired result. So this is an example of again the artificial vegetative propagation since human beings are involved. So cutting, then your grafting, this is the example of grafting. Layering, now layering is what sometimes you will see in case of jasmine, the plant is growing, some of the that is your shoot, it touches the ground and it gets layered or covered with soil. So when it gets covered with soil, gradually it will start rooting, and now if you separate it, if you cut it and if you sow it in somewhere else, then it will develop into a new plant. So that is called a layering. So this is also being chosen by human beings, that which plant we will be selecting in the form of layering. So that is why that will also be coming under your that is your artificial propagation. Although in nature natural layering also takes place, but generally artificial vegetative propagation is done by the three processes. Number one is your cutting, stem cutting, number two is that of your grafting, and number three is that of your layering. In your NCERT book, in a page that is a box is there, okay, in which, do you know type of box, in which it is written about tissue culture. Now tissue culture is not so broadly being dealt in the NCERT, but you should know what is a tissue culture. Tissue culture is also a kind of asexual reproduction. The reason is because here the meristematic cells, the meristematic tissues, either from the shoot tip, because shoot always grows, isn't it? So growing tip is present in the shoot and the growing portion is present in the root tip also. So either you can select the root tip or you can select the shoot tip, and you can grow them in a nutrient media. Now this nutrient media will be a combination of various kinds of hormones in a definite proportion and some mineral, that is both micro and macro elements, which are required for the growth of the plant. And as a result, what happens is that in the aseptic condition, when it is kept, this tissue starts multiplying. So when the tissue starts multiplying, it forms a mass of cell. Now this mass of cell is undifferentiated. Here you cannot find which one is a shoot portion, which one is a root portion, or what it is. Okay, so gradually what happens, cell differentiation starts, and then small plantlets comes, that is shooting and rooting starts. Now so from a single segment of tissue you are getting multiple copies of the same plant. So in a very short duration of time you get a lot of plants from this tissue culture method. It is also known as micro propagation. Okay, so this is quite in practice nowadays, and those plants which flower very lately, or you know, in case of bamboos, some varieties of bamboos are there which flower after 60 years or even after 100 years. So one has to wait for 60 years and 100 years to get the next, you know, crops or the seeds. You cannot afford to do so. Orchids, which are ornamental and very rare plants, some medicinal plants which are very rare or is in the verge of extinction. So by means of this tissue culture method practices, we can develop these plants and we can grow them and we can get the desired result. So that is also a kind of asexual reproduction, because here the single parent is involved and the tissues from that single parent is actually involved in making up of the plants. So this is all about the asexual mode of reproduction in case of both unicellular as well as the simplified multicellular organism and complex multicellular organisms like that of higher plants, which grows by means of vegetative propagation or your artificial vegetative propagation. In our coming class, we will be seeing about the sexual reproduction both in case of flowering plants as well as in case of human beings, and finally the reproductive health.